Right, good afternoon, everybody. I think that's just about everybody in. Welcome to this session with myself and more importantly with Rhodri Mogford, who is the Senior Publisher in History at Bloomsbury Academic. This is our now annual introduction or explanation of our Inclusive History scheme. So I want to say a little bit about the Inclusive History scheme, but mainly the purpose of this session this afternoon is for Rhodri to explain it in more detail, but also to allow a space for you to ask questions. I'll introduce myself. I'm Claire Langhammer. I'm Director of the Institute of Historical Research. I work on 20th century British history, one of the real joys of my present job is that I get to spend a lot of time talking to people about fields of history that are really far away from the stuff that I'm used to doing myself, and it's an absolute joy. And particularly I get to do quite a bit of work with our doctoral and early career fellows, some of whom are here I know on this Zoom call, and that is a particular pleasure and privilege, because I then do really get to move across time and place in really interesting and provoking ways. So all of which is to say that everybody on the call is incredibly welcome. And we look forward to talking with you and thinking about this move from thesis to book this afternoon. We are recording the session. You should have got that little indication when you joined the call. And as I say, after Rhodri's done his bit, we'll be opening it up to questions, and we'll be using the normal kind of Zoom formulas, raised hand, or, if you want to articulate your question yourself, or if you would like to put your question in the chat, I can read it out and we can address it that way. I wanted to say a little bit about the Inclusive Histories partnership that the IHR has with Bloomsbury and how it came about. This is the second year that it's run. And in part, it came through a conversation between ourselves and Rhodri about the challenges that people in the earlier stage of their career are facing at the moment. We all are acutely aware of the issues around precarity, the lack of jobs, sometimes a lack of institutional support for people who are really kind of they've done their research or they're just finishing their research, and that question of like, how then do you get it published as a monograph is really key, I think, for people at that stage. And yet sometimes the support is not necessarily there. So we wanted to do something that supported people, that gave advice, but also gave some expertise as the project developed. But this was also in our minds was the fact that there are very particular challenges being faced by particular groups of people within academia at the moment, real structural inequalities, and we want to do something that could help address that as well. So the kind of driver of the scheme really is to do what it says, to support a historical practice that is as inclusive as it can possibly be, both in terms of the subject matter, but also in terms of the historians who are doing the history. This initiative is, of course, a very tiny drop in the water, really, of trying to improve things and support people at this stage. But we kind of hope that in addition to some other initiatives that we've got on the go here at the IHR, and that I know that Bloomsbury are interested in supporting they have their own initiatives as well. We hope that it just helps a little bit. The actual sort of process, I think Rhodri is going to talk through in detail later on, and Rhodri, you might want to also talk about the person who was managed to get a contract with Bloomsbury through last year's initiative. So at this stage, I'm going to pass over to Rhodri. I'm going to now be quiet. I'll come back and field questions later on, but over to you, Rhodri. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Claire. Yeah, and good afternoon or good morning, good evening, depending on where you're sort of tuning in from. Delighted to be able to come and chat to you all today. Hopefully, give you a bit more information, as Claire said, about the initiative. Also, want to kind of take this as an opportunity to give a bit more information, offer you some of my thoughts and suggestions about that kind of that big step that Claire mentioned about, moving from a PhD thesis to having a book format for your work that works as a scholarly monograph, and what kind of adjustments and changes you need to think about as you look to make that step, because I think that's a really important thing that early career researchers are looking to get more of a handle on. And I think hopefully I should be able to give some practical advice, and maybe some less practical advice about how to kind of think about that, because there's a few different sort of aspects to it that I think are worth considering. And then after that, yeah, happy to kind of have a bit of a Q&A. I know lots of people will have different specific questions, queries regarding kind of the academic publishing process, how it works, what we're looking for as academic publishers, and kind of some of the kind of the finer details, I suppose, about how a kind of an academic book submission works, and the various different stages that follow after that. So we can go through that, and happy to pick up questions that anyone may have. Just to give you a bit more of an introduction to me and my background, I guess, quickly, very briefly. So as Claire kindly introduced me, my name's Rodri Mogford. I'm the senior publisher at Bloomsbury Academic. I've been working on the history list there now for about 12 and a half years, I think it is. So I've been there a while, and my main areas of commissioning focus in recent years have tended to be kind of European history and medieval history. I work with a team of three editors, so although my sort of parameters, if you like, are fixed, we're there and available to cater for whatever the project may be, and whatever the kind of the time period or the geographical focus. I publish, I've been working on a large range of kind of what you would consider academic books, from kind of research monographs, edited volumes, right the way through to kind of more student-friendly text, shall we say, that might get used on undergraduate courses, that kind of thing. Major reference works for libraries, even a big digital platform that's sold to universities on subscription. So my experience is quite varied and wide-ranging when it comes to academic publishing. And as far as monographs are concerned, and research-oriented first books, if you like, I can't. I've probably lost count of the number I've published over the last decade or so. So hopefully, it's not to say I'll have the answer to any questions that you have, but hopefully that will have sort of given me enough experience to hopefully have a chance of tackling most of the queries that you might have, and hopefully, say by the end, give you a bit more information on, the kinds of things that you're wanting to know more about. So before I get into talking about the kind of the key areas where, I'd like to give impart a bit of advice as far as making that sort of adjustment from thesis to monograph is concerned, just want to kind of echo and follow up on a couple of the comments Claire made about the actual initiative itself. We're really pleased with how the initiative has gone in its first year from a publishing perspective. It's done everything I think we hoped it would, in terms of, as Claire said, it's not the whole solution to what is obviously a very big and complex issue, but that idea of bringing more diversity, both in terms of authorship and in terms of the content that's out there in the world, in terms of academic publishing. I think it's a step in the right direction, and we feel that it's an important and pragmatic one that we're happy to sort of continue, and we want this partnership to continue to grow and grow. The actual procedure itself, as you'll be able to find out on the IHR web pages that are related to the initiative, there's some FAQs there that will hopefully I guess sort of help you with a few of those sorts of queries that you might have. But I mean, broadly speaking, We're looking for initial submissions. I think it's by the end of January. Jade or Claire can correct me if I'm wrong in saying that. So looking for initial proposals by the end of January. After that, there'll be a process in place whereby the IHR has a shortlisting panel that will be looking to kind of whittle down the number of proposals that we receive to a kind of a shortlist that will then be passed to us at Bloomsbury. We will look to get some external anonymous peer review feedback for all of those shortlisted projects. It's at that point that once we have the feedback in, we'll look to try and make a decision on, where we think the grant should go and which sort of project has been selected, for the initiative. We'll share the feedback with all shortlisted authors. And I, on my side, will give some thoughts and suggestions for anyone that isn't successful with the initiative, and as to what next steps might be for those people that were shortlisted but unfortunately haven't got been selected for the initiative. And then obviously with the person that is selected, we're in the nice position of being able to make a contract offer on behalf of Bloomsbury, provide the grant money as well. So it's obviously the time frame for that, we'd like to move that on from kind of submissions finishing in January, by sort of the end of April. I think we'd like to have everything kind of finalized. There's a degree of uncertainty around that comes with reviewers and a peer review process, which is open to a few variables when it comes to people delivering reports on time and that kind of thing. But that's kind of the time frame that we'd like to keep to. I can see something just popped up as a question there. I'll maybe leave questions for now regarding the initiative and everything else, and we can kind of tackle it all afterwards, if that probably makes sense. So yeah, that's just a bit of background on the initiative and how the format works. And obviously, once we've got a kind of a selected individual and project for the initiative, it's a case of determining with that author what a suitable time frame is for manuscript delivery. Once a manuscript's delivered, we're looking to publish that book then within about sort of 9 months of when we receive and accept the manuscript. So that's a very sort of broad brush timetable, I suppose, for how that looks for anyone that's looking to submit a proposal for the initiative. So I'll just kind of not sort of rather clunkily segue now then into kind of, I guess, the next section of what I want to talk a little bit about, which is thinking about this shift from thesis to a monograph publication. So, I mean, I think the key thing to note is that when you're revising your PhD for book publication, this is obviously going to necessarily involve some adaptation, both in terms of content and style, when it comes to the dissertation. It's important to remember that, the aim and emphasis of the book manuscript should always be to try and see how you're making and put across how you're making an original contribution to scholarly dialogue. Rather than trying to prove that you deserve to be awarded your PhD. The purpose of this writing is very different from what you're looking to achieve with that thesis. So the primary goal for revising a dissertation should always be to try and make every element of the manuscript focused, essential, and succinct. Think about your audience. I think that, bear in mind the target audience of your book. Obviously, academic monographs are written for a relatively specialist audience of scholars and students. However, it's important to bear in mind any kind of crossover or interdisciplinary appeal that your book may have. And remember that your audience for the book, might have a wider research interest than your PhD committee. This is an opportunity to try and make the book a bit more accessible to a slightly wider range of readers. It's not to say that you can expect to kind of take a topic for a thesis and convert it into something that could be read by all and sundry, but it does provide an opportunity to just expand that reader base by making things, just untangling jargon and other specifics, which I could talk a little bit more about in a minute. Just trying to find ways of just making the text a little bit less opaque, a little bit more accessible, as I say. Bear in mind the potential for broader appeal and make sure the manuscript is readable throughout. Title. It seems quite superficial, but I mean, it is really important. A title, for a monograph needs to be clear, concise, and direct. essentially it needs to reflect the main content of the book and how it's situated in a specific discipline or sub-discipline. Just to give you a couple of examples of the kind of thing that we're talking about. I mean, when it comes to from a marketability point of view for an academic publisher, search engine optimization is a phrase I hear. It's not particularly glamorous phrase, but it's a phrase I hear a lot from my marketing department. And having keywords and being able to bump your book higher up the search engine results of people that are scrambling and looking on Google, and other search engines are available. It's important to try and make sure that your book is coming to the fore when people are searching for the kinds of terms that somebody in your area is going to be looking for texts with. Another pointer is when it comes to academic libraries, for example. Librarians sometimes are so kind of are drowning in lists of titles that they're being asked to look at for potential purchase. When it comes to research monographs, often librarians will literally only be presented with a list of main titles. So if your book, as a kind of if you're thinking back to what we were talking about a minute ago, as a contribution to scholarly dialogue, isn't very sort of specifically locating what your book is, and when I think about history in particular, I'd be thinking about aspects of chronology, geographical focus. Get that into the title, give people a clear understanding of what you're writing about, where's it happening, when's it happening, what's it about. If you can get those things into a title, then I think that gives a clear indication not only of I think as I say, from a marketing point of view, but I also think for example, as an editor, when I receive a proposal, if I've got a nice clear title, that immediately tells me this is somebody that knows what they're writing about and they know who they're writing it for. They understand the kind of the language of academic publishing. They understand that this is the kind of title, rather than something that's poetically inclined and not very not in any way signposting the content of the book. That's not really what we're after when it comes to academic monograph titles. So yeah, that's definitely a key consideration, I'd say, when it comes to that switch from thesis to monograph. Structure. So there's a few different things you can think about when it comes to the overarching structure. Think that it needs to be clear, logical, easy to navigate. It should also reflect the progression of your research and objectives. Chapter length. Chapters should be even and they shouldn't be overly long. I'd say once a chapter gets up and beyond kind of 10,000 words, 12,000 words at an absolute push, you want to be thinking to yourself, is this kind of collapsing in on itself? I mean, is this really something that somebody's going to be able to sit down and read and make sense of, and feel like they're being carried along and being brought along with the development of the argument in the way you'd want them to. Each chapter needs to have that kind of manageable length for a reader. And subheadings are another way of thinking about that. Are you going to use subheadings? If you are, it's good to use them consistently, roughly the same numbers, and roughly, breaking those subsections of chapters down into similar size across different chapters, so that there's a consistency. Because I think consistency, both in terms of chapter length and the kind of the overarching structure of what you're working on, it gives a sense of confidence, I think, and it gives a reader kind of a feeling that, yeah, this author knows how they're constructing their argument. There's a roadmap here. There's a framework that they're working to, and they're using that framework to take me through their thinking and take me through their arguments. I'd strongly consider revising your table of contents. This is the first thing that a reader encounters in a book. We list our tables of contents on our book pages on our website for anyone that's browsing and looking to purchase. Chapter titles need to be clear, a bit like book titles, concise, include keywords, names, and a pet hate of mine personally is, I'd want to try and move, I'd always encourage people to try and move away from the quote in chapter titles. You know, the odd one is fine if you really, you know, are particularly drawn to something. But I mean, I sometimes get projects in where, you know, every chapter title is kind of like a lengthy quote, effectively followed by, you know, a chapter subtitle that's then actually telling me what the chapter's about. And you know, while it can be nice to have these little flourishes, I mean, when you read that on a page, whether it's on a contents page or whether it's on a web page, I mean, I hate to say it, but people just switch off, myself included. You know, it's just too much. It's too much text. You want that content to give you a quick bang, a quick fire entry point into what the coverage of a book's going to be. You know, it's best to kind of it may sound boring, but actually I think it's much more productive to kind of just get to the heart of what it is that you're covering in each of the chapters. And I think readers will thank you for it, both, you know, sort of the casual browser and the person that's really going to be making use of the text in greater detail. Consider including a brief introduction. You know, you don't need a long explication of the state of the discipline, big literature review. We can do away with all that. You know, you don't need to be convincing people at every turn that you've read everything under the sun. That's really much more the realm of the PhD thesis. You know, it's much more important to just like extract what's directly relevant to your argument and make sure that you're kind of like, you know, setting your stall out. What is your underlying argument for the book? Keep that introduction concise, and then add a conclusion as well. Give, you know, to help give the whole thing some shape. You know, that it all helps to kind of helping to create that kind of coherent whole. So I'd always recommend that, thinking about bookending, but not sort of you know, going laboring it, I suppose, is the point. The bibliography, that should definitely be shorter than, you know, the bibliography for your thesis. You know, and remove any references that are not strictly necessary. That's another thing to consider. Sort of moving on, thinking about content, you know, the aims and objectives of the overall project should be central to the narrative throughout. You know, the book should essentially, you know, be a more succinct and focused version of the dissertation. Only include material that genuinely moves the narrative forward, and keep an eye on the overall story. So, you know, the main argument then can feel really clear and compelling. Create and sustain an authorial voice. You know, your book is your contribution to scholarly debate rather than an academic requirement, and so the style of the narrative needs to reflect that. You know, feel bold enough to make kind of confident, fluid, and clear statements. Avoid the passive voice, and yeah, just keep that argument moving and the reasoning sort of cogent throughout. Remove unessential scholarly materials that are obviously going to identify your manuscript as a PhD thesis. You know, like I was touching upon earlier, chapters on literature review, methodology, you know, overviews of secondary material, and your theoretical approach, you know, need to be integrated into the main text only when they're necessary. And that's really the kind of the shift that you want to see with that sort of content. Avoid repetitive material. You know, you don't need to keep sort of, you know, returning back and around to the same points over and over again. If you are, then, you know, things are, you know, that's superfluous. You don't need it. Remove lengthy and unnecessary notes. There's a much lower level of annotation expected in a book than in a thesis. So tame those runaway notes. You know, too many notes are going to compromise the readability of a book. And I also think that, you know, depending on your word count and where you're at with the coverage of a book, you know, those notes, you strip away a couple of thousand words there. They could be put to use in other ways, in more productive ways in the main text. So think about kind of, you know, ways of really sort of paring those back wherever you can. Remove lengthy and unnecessary quotations. You know, only quote judiciously. You know, make sure all the examples keep the book moving forward. You know, we don't need huge swathes of quotation, kind of, you know, breaking up the text, sort of kind of stifling the flow of your narrative. This is your book. We don't want to, we want sort of quotation where it's relevant and it's sort of concisely inserted. But we want to hear your narrative, not kind of like have these lengthy quotes kind of blocking the way. Refer to this book rather than this thesis. It seems an obvious one, but just make sure that you kind of, even down to the word, you start to move into a different language, thinking about this as a book and making sure that, right the way through the text, that's what you're referring to rather than the thesis. Limit unnecessary jargon, or always include explanations where necessary for a non-specialist audience. Remove anything that in any way indicates the origin of the book as being derived from a PhD. And that includes thanking PhD supervisors. There's ways of thanking a PhD supervisor that can be a little bit more, sort of subtle. You can just say, I would like to thank X for her many insightful comments on my manuscript, rather than saying, I'd like to thank this person because they've turned this, helped me turn this from a thesis into a book, or whatever. It just helps, particularly with library sales. For good or bad, what we find is, the sales data suggests from our sales teams that, if a book is clearly marked as something that's come from a PhD thesis, global sales across academic libraries tend to be lower than books that are considered to be just kind of independent of a PhD thesis. So yeah, just make things a little bit more implicit rather than explicit when it comes to that side of things. It's and I think the last thing, which is probably the most important thing, tip that I can give you on this is feedback. Just get as much feedback as you can. Don't be or try as far as you can not to be too precious about what you're developing. Share things with colleagues, share chapters, bother people, get feedback, family members, anyone. It's people that can give you a fresh pair of eyes, give you their thoughts on, because you can never get enough feedback. Not all of it's going to be, going to result in you making changes. Not all of it's going to be, kind of mind altering in terms of what it's bringing to you. You can disregard some feedback. That's fine. But I think the real sort of skill is to just get as and trick of it is to get as much feedback as you can, as I say, from colleagues and so on, because it's only then by getting various different perspectives that you can helps you see the wood from the trees on things that maybe you're laboring the point somewhere, maybe a chapter just feels too long, and it'll just give you a kind of a fresh kind of consideration to take into account. And what that will allow you to do is, because any good academic publisher, when we receive a manuscript, when we receive a proposal, we'll get it peer reviewed, we share the feedback. When we get the manuscript in, we'll get it peer reviewed, we'll share the feedback, and that's all great, and that all is to the good, and that's part of what we offer as an academic publisher. Any good academic publisher does. But I think there's also a kind of a responsibility, that rests with you as an author with your own work, to really find, to kind of take the initiative and say, well, I want this to be the best it can be. And, if that means presenting us with a manuscript that's already been seen by 3, 4, 5 other academics or people that in your networks and that kind of thing. Obviously, if you can't do that, that's fine. You can only do what you can do, but it's definitely something to think about, is to try and see how fine-tuned and developed you feel like you can make the text through collaboration and feedback from others, before you even present something to a publisher. Because I think doing that can only improve your chances, whether it's of getting a project contracted or getting a final manuscript, sort of approved and getting the kind of response then in the academic community that you want, whether that's journal reviews, endorsements, and so on, prize submissions. These things can all be aided by that extra development work that goes in in the earlier stages. So yeah, I think that was pretty much everything I had to say, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Audrey. I, for one, I always learn from listening to you. And I can't remember whether you said this last year, but your pet hate of the quote as the chapter. As somebody who really likes a good quote as a chapter.
Well, yeah, I've just had a spate of these, so perhaps they're particularly on my mind at the moment. So I've seen this as a cathartic opportunity to get out my grievance.
I mean, I think that what I would say is perhaps save those gorgeous quotes for your articles and your chapters, not not your books, other ones, other people's edited collections. You can throw them in there, but not in your monograph. And the other thing that really struck me, at the sort of, apart from taming your, what did you say, tame runaway notes, which I also, we all should note that. I think runaway notes are, we're bedeviled by them as historians. I mean, essentially that making that case for why it matters and who your audience is, particularly when you're doing the proposal, is so key, isn't it? So we'll open it up to questions. I might come back in a minute with some other points. We have a question there from Amelia Clegg. Amelia.
Hello, hi, thank you very much for that. That's been really useful. I've recently graduated, so my thesis is already out there in the world online. So my question is to do with because I couldn't embargo it at the time. I do have new material. There's obviously other avenues to explore. With regards to approaching a press, with that in mind, because that's not everybody's story. What advice would you give around that, matter? How to put, this question is coming out with, all jumbly, but that's been my concern, for the book specifically. And then, so, and the January, the proposals, is that every January then? That's just to double check. So the next one will be opening, if you don't make this end of January, next end of January. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that would be the aim on the January deadline front. Certainly, I think I see Claire nodding there in a small window in my my top right hand corner. So yeah, I think that's our aim. I mean, obviously we will try to make broadcast any changes to that as quickly as we can and as kind of loudly as we can online. But yeah, I mean, like, I think you can kind of take that as the case. It's an interesting one as far as the embargo is concerned. I mean, obviously it's like with a lot of things when it comes to sort of submissions. I mean, I think the key thing is with whether you're whoever you're kind of, different publishers will have slightly different approaches. So I think the key thing is to kind of, with something like that, I would get the embargo sort of situation upfront and clear with anyone, like very early on in kind of discussions when you're submitting something. Just because if they have a particular policy on that with regards to accepting submissions, they can kind of, sooner rather than later, and it avoids kind of like, disappointment down the line when you've already invested time and effort into discussions with somebody. I mean, it varies. I would say, like, from our perspective, like, I actually had an email exchange with somebody who's got in touch with me a little earlier today, honestly, on this very subject. So it is kind of, I've been mulling it over. I mean, I think that at the moment, our approach on the list would be, if a full thesis is available freely online, from a kind of a commercial perspective, what you want to know is, well, like some of the things that we've just been talking about, I would be looking for that author to kind of clearly signpost to me the ways in which this book that's going to be different to the thesis. So, both in terms of sort of the way it's structured, but also maybe coverage as well. Like, how have the arguments been developed? Has the scope increased? Are you looking at more case studies than in the thesis? That kind of thing. Things that are going to make a kind of a point of difference. You
can't put everything in the thesis. So there's still so I think that's the key, isn't it? To then just sort of like develop that a bit more.
Exactly. Yeah, that's it. And I'd be looking to do that. And I mean, the kind of things that, I mean, obviously I don't know the specifics of your study, but, as I say, as a commercial publisher, you're, an academic one, but, you're looking to sell books to libraries, you're looking to sell to the widest possible global audience, So, for example, if you've got a book that's looking at kind of like a 15-year period in history, And actually what you're saying is, now that I'm looking to develop the book, I'm doing away with my literature review and my methodological chapter, and that's actually giving me the scope to, increase my study by, I'm actually looking at this, 1830 to 1900 or whatever it is, or I'm now looking at, France and Germany in comparison, whereas before my thesis was only really looking at France, that kind of thing. It all helps because essentially, if you expand the geography, you expand the chronology, expand the different perspectives that you're bringing into it, to the book, that increases potential market reach. There's more scholars, more academics that are going to have a potential interest in the book. So, and it's also helping to distinguish what you're presenting for publication versus what's available freely online. So all those things are going to kind of reassure a publisher that they aren't, because from my point of view, what I don't want to be doing is looking at it and going, yeah, this is very similar to the thesis, and the thesis is already available online. How are we going to sell any copies? That's the blunt sort of inner workings, that an editor's going to be going through. So yeah, if you can foreground to that press as much as possible how things have moved on and why that would make this book much more commercially attractive, then that you're convinced, you're making the case that's going to be harder to deny then, I suppose.
Would something like inclusion of other archive material that you couldn't include, obviously that would also then, so little things like that you
absolutely any kind of
anything that makes it new.
Yeah, exactly. Any kind of like definitive kind of sort of statements you can make on things that are improving, expanding, developing what's already available in the thesis to what you're including in the book itself, I think is is all to the good, really.
Thank you.
Okay.
Marvellous, thank you so much. Now we've got some questions in the chat while other people are thinking about what they want to ask. These are largely around the actual nature of the proposal. So could you talk a little bit about the proposal itself, Rodri, and what it should look like?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I mean, a good proposal. I mean, obviously we've touched upon title. You probably heard me sort of bore you enough on my thoughts on what a title should look like for an academic monograph, and obviously we've talked about the kind of things that I would expect to see when I look at a table of contents. I think what you're looking to do is, ideally, you want to be able to have your kind of elevator pitch. Your sort of 25 to 30 words. Can this person articulate to me in 30 words what it is that they're doing with this book? Because like we were all the kinds of things we were talking about earlier with the structure and the content and everything else, and how you're looking to shift the book from a thesis to a monograph, these 30 words that you should be able to present to somebody should be ringing in your ears the entire time you're developing the text and trying to create that jump from thesis to monograph, because that's at the heart, though, that statement should be at the heart of what your overarching argument is, what should be driving your book all the way through from from start to finish. So yeah, be able to kind of and if you can't, then you maybe want to take a step back and think, oh well, why can't I really? Is that like what is it that you're wanting to do with this book in 25 to 30 words? And that's kind of like at the top of the proposal, and that immediately sort of gives me a good indication of whether this is something that's going to be worth considering for the list, I suppose. Beyond that, then you sort of want to be able to provide a kind of a 300 word, 250 to 300 words, slightly more detailed explanation of what it is the book's doing. I would always say to people, focus on your book, in terms of that description and throughout the proposal, really. Like, I don't like one of the, again, I think a bit of a pet hate of mine when it comes to proposals is don't worry too much about setting the scene, and kind of like, creating sort of the backdrop. What I want to know is, what is it that your book is doing that is making that contribution to the scholarly dialogue? What is it adding to the literature in the field? So if you can get to the heart of that, it doesn't need to be overly elaborate in terms of its prose. You don't need to it doesn't need to be marvelously poetic. It just needs you need to just get to the core of what it is that your book's offering. A detailed, I say detailed, 1 to 2 paragraph chapter by chapter synopses is really useful, because if you think about it, the aim of any proposal is that we want to be able to, or part of the aim is that we want to be able to send it out for peer review. We need to be able to give peer reviewers a good understanding of not just the project as a whole, but how that trajectory is working chapter to chapter. What's been covered in chapter 1, what's been covered in chapter 2, and so on and so forth. Particularly I think because if you as an author there, it's a really good opportunity when you come to get peer review feedback of a proposal. If a peer reviewer reads a chapter by chapter synopses and sees a glaring omission, they might come up with a suggestion for something you haven't even thought of, in terms of, oh yeah, I should be covering that in chapter 3. Why didn't I think of that? Go away. And it'll just help to strengthen and develop the project even more. I think those are the key things. I think I always like to get a clear understanding from an author, particularly when you're talking about a research monograph. You get asked about what do you see as the potential market for the book. A trap there, I think, for a lot of monograph authors, because they see this on a proposal form, and I think some people panic a little bit, and they feel like they've got to sort of suggest that their book is all things to all people, or that it's going to be a Sunday Times bestseller or something. You don't need to worry about that. As an academic publisher, what we're looking for is people to understand clearly the specific audience they're trying to reach. That it's a scholarly audience, but it will be of interest to scholars in these different areas. You may who knows, if your book has a bit of interdisciplinary appeal, fine, mention, the book may have a bit of a reach in politics, or it may have a bit of a reach in another subject, in philosophy, or whatever it may be. Make the point. And actually, when you're thinking about which publisher to submit to, if your book does have, while we're on the subject, if your book does have a bit of interdisciplinary appeal, try and think about where you're reaching out in terms of a publisher. If your book straddles a couple of different disciplines, make sure you're submitting to a publisher that publishes in both of those disciplines, because it's no good to a publisher if you say, oh well, I've got potential secondary readership in philosophy, but actually they don't publish in philosophy. That means they have no market reach there, so that audience for them is effectively redundant in any meaningful way. So whereas if you present to, say, obviously at Bloomsbury we've got lists in lots of different subject areas. So if you have a book that maybe has a bit of a reach in political science, or you have philosophy, we have very active and vibrant lists, mailing lists in philosophy, politics. So we have the capacity to market the books into those different disciplines. So, and that would be seen as a strength. So to some publishers, that interdisciplinarity might be seen as not really something they can work with / a weakness, whereas for others it might be a strength. So just know your publisher as well, I would say, when it comes to that side of things. But yeah, when it comes to market, don't overreach. I get more worried when I see a book comes in that's on a quite a niche subject, that's clearly written for a scholarly audience, and the person's writing the proposal is saying, oh, and I think that it's got the potential to reach a general readership, and it's a book on nuns in 1870s Paris or something. It's like, maybe, but depending on the way it's written, but chances are that's probably not where you're going to be selling your book. So it gives me a much more confidence to know that my author knows where their book sits, who it's being written for. I wouldn't worry too much about competition when it comes to research monographs, as long as you can make the point that, which it should be, because it's, your thesis, it's based on your thesis, as long as it's an original contribution to the scholarly dialogue and nobody's, taking the same approach to the same subject as you in a book already, which obviously really shouldn't be the case, then don't spend too much time trying to trawl for competition, because there's always that competition section in proposal forms. Just note a couple of related titles, just so you can give the publisher, your take on where you see the book fitting into the literature, I suppose. So if somebody's, written on the the social history angle of the same subject that you're writing a book on, and you're actually taking a much more of a political approach, use that as an opportunity to point to your understanding of what's out there, and almost seeing it as a chance to kind of show off again what it is that's distinctive about your book and what it's doing to add to what's going on in the field already. So I think that's probably covers most of what I'd expect to see anyway in a proposal.
Thank you, Rodri. I'm just going to one in the chat. Somebody said they've got to leave, but is the recording going to be available to watch later? Beck, it is. So you can watch this as many times as you want at your leisure. Just to then sort of, I suppose to. Because I think Rodri, what you're doing really brilliantly is offering advice that is applicable to people approaching other publishers as well as Bloomsbury, which is very generous of you. But I just want to recap in terms of the specifics of the proposal for this particular initiative. So what we're saying really is, we need a title, we need the elevator pitch, the 30 words, we need a sort of 300-word summary, contents, and then that chapter by chapter synopsis with, I think, if you can suggest possible reviewers. I think we found that quite useful last year, didn't we, Rodri? Now my question to Rodri is I'm thinking a 10 to 15 page maximum for a proposal. Would I be right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's certainly no more than 15. Yeah, as you say, Claire. I think the trick here again is you want to see people's ability to be concise. I mean, really, 10 pages should be plenty to provide what's needed. The best proposals that I work with, they're not necessarily the longest. Yeah, 10 pages, as you say, sort of give some of the word counts there that we were talking about, 25, 30 word elevator pitch, 300 word description, chapter by chapter synopsis. That's really the bulk of the proposal already. I mean, that if that runs to more than 5-6 pages, really, then you must have a lot of chapters. But it's so I would say, yeah, that would be plenty.
So essentially your proposal is modeling your ability to be succinct and also your ability to be clear in lots of ways. I, for one, would love to be reading a book about nuns in Paris, but I'm going to now pass over to some of the other questions. So we've got a question there from Aja. Sorry if I've mispronounced your first name.
Hi, that's fine. It's Aya. I think Roger actually did cover at least part of it, because in academic publishing previously, when I've attended similar type of talks while I was still doing my research, they say provide a list of titles where your work, where your book, where your manuscript fits in. How does it fit the gap? So, for example, X person has written similar topic from this perspective. I need to then say who it is, what the book is about, how do I fit in that? So are you expecting to see, because you mentioning titles and so on, do you actually want a list of any kind, or would you be looking to have a list of saying, these books have covered these areas, what I'm doing is this?
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, and again, I don't think it needs to be a lengthy list. I think really you want to be sort of cherry picking 2, maybe 3 titles max. What I'd rather see is, rather than like a long list of titles, 2 to 3 of books that are out there that you think are the closest in relation to your book, and then just 1 or 2 lines, literally, maximum 2 lines, just saying, this book does X, but my book's doing Y. That's the gap. You know what I mean? This is where we differ, and this is why what my book is doing is bringing something new to the table. Because from a kind of a scholarly publishing point of view, for an academic library market and so on, as long as we've got that point of distinction, then obviously you're building on what's already available in the sort of in the field. So we don't need much more than that. We just need to know that there is a hook that we can use to kind of sort of to sell this book to that market, really.
Would that be then within that 250, 300 word section, or separate completely?
I would have that separate. I mean, the way I think about our proposal form at Bloomsbury, breaks it down. And that's kind of what I was maybe saying in a slightly sort of confusing way at the beginning, was that when I talked about like the backdrop and the background and just cutting that, when it comes to at the top of the proposal, I want to see you focusing on your your project entirely. You know, what is it that's distinctive about it? You know, give me a bit more information. What's the coverage? You know, what are the different approaches that are being taken? You know, are there unpublished archival sources that you're using from a particular sort of area where that haven't been used before? You know, just focus all on that in that first section, and then towards the end, when you think about market and competition in kind of different sections, to say, keep it brief, keep it with the market, be sort of be realistic, and with the competition, keep it concise and always related to your book. You know, so as I say, 2-3 books is plenty. Just because I think for an editor, you know, you don't want to be kind of overwhelmed with information. You just want to be able to kind of be signposted in the direction of the 2 or 3 key related titles that already exist, and how your book relates to them, and that's all the information we need, really.
Thank you.
We also have a question from Mina.
Yes, thank you so much. My question's been answered. I wanted to ask you about how do we not mention the fact that this came out of our thesis? I mean, it's going to look really odd if I say that I came up with all this stuff. So could you just help, suggest how we can or can we refer in passing or not at all? I'm a little confused about that one. And secondly, there's another question in the chat, and I think both of us want you to clarify this thing about applying, because Claire, the link you sent says we have to submit it to, there's an email to Jade Chesterton, but IHR has got a SurveyMonkey application where it says just submit your proposal. So I'm a little confused about what is to be done. So if there's an application form, please do share it here. That's it. Thank you so much. It was a great session.
Shall I just answer that one? Yes, we're using a new system this year. We've got a new sort of system for all of our applications, fellowships, prizes, including this. So we want everything to go through that. But if you do end up sending it, the frequently asked question was from last year, if you do send it to Jade, she will make sure that it ends up on the system. In terms of the form itself, we can put a model from, a model example of an unpopulated book proposal up there for you, and I could ask Gemma to send one round. But I think our sense is the key thing is to really know the project and to get a sense of the project. Would I be right, Rodri?
Yes, yeah, that's completely right. Yeah, no, that sounds fine. And I'm just, did you have anything else to add on that, Claire, or shall I tackle the other bit of the question? Okay. Yeah. So, Mina, you were asking about I forgive me if I don't totally understand, but and correct me if you want to steer me in a different direction. I mean, I think you just want to be making sure that, as I say, if you're thinking about acknowledgements, for example, at the outset, I mean, I would just find ways of phrasing your thanks for whether it's PhD examiners. You can use names, but maybe just don't refer to them as in relation to the PhD. So if you're thanking Joe Bloggs for who may have been your examiner, for example, and you just say, I'd like to thank Joe Bloggs for their help in me developing this book, or something like that. You can kind of show acknowledgement, I guess, and give thanks without kind of explicitly referring to this having a kind of a PhD origin, I suppose. I mean, I'm not sure, and as I say, short of then in the main text itself, just making sure that you're referring to the fact that this is now a book, not a thesis. I can't think of any other obvious moments where the kind of that kind of thesis origin would be revealed. But if there's anything you had in mind that you outside of that you wanted a bit of advice on, and you could give me a steer towards, let me know, and I can have a think about it.
Thanks. No, I was just wondering, I agree the point about thanking supervisors, but for instance, when you explain the reason for the book, so I'm sending you a proposal. Obviously, the proposal is easy to avoid mentioning the thesis, but eventually, supposing I want to write an introduction to the book, how do I say without mentioning the fact that this was my PhD project,
Well, I think you could probably kind of, without wanting to make it sound too sneaky, I think you can kind of probably work around that, which is, essentially, what is it I mean, yes, it's come from your thesis, but what is it that actually interests you about the area, I guess, is that because that's kind of what's compelled you presumably to work on it for your thesis. So I would concentrate on kind of like what the underlying sort of draw and appeal of this area is for you intellectually, and talk about things in those terms, rather than worry about kind of feeling like somebody needs a full explanation from you on kind of like the full sort of life of this, from a kind of a sort of a kernel of an interest through to a thesis, through to a book. I don't think anyone needs to know all that. You know, you're not sort of on trial, so to speak, in terms of in that introduction. You don't need to kind of. I don't think anyone needs that level of detail. I think if you want to add, as I say, a bit of kind of like a bit of the origins in kind of like what interests you and what stimulates you about this area intellectually, why these particular ideas, why this particular field, you know, has a resonance for you. I think you can do that, but I don't think you need to bring in discussion of the thesis as being part of that story, really.
Yeah, great. Thanks. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
I've put a link in the chat to Bloomsbury's book proposal page, and halfway down in the list you can download a copy of the academic proposal if you want to use that as your model.
Thanks, Claire.
We had a question in, George. Thanks for the great tips. Do you prefer to receive a full manuscript or sample chapters with a proposal? So I guess this is speaking to, if you're not going through this particular initiative, if you're submitting a proposal to a publisher.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, as Claire said, because I guess the thing to be clear here is for the purposes of the initiative, yeah, we're not wanting sample chapters, are we, or any kind of support sample chapters. I think we want to try and maintain a degree of, you know, both from a pragmatic point of view in terms of the amount of material to consider and everything else, and also, you know, in terms of ensuring there's a kind of like a level playing field and a kind of consistency of considering people's proposals in as like for like a fashion as we can. I think that's a better way to go. In terms of just like general submissions to publishers, yeah, I mean, my advice, I mean, it varies, like anything, you know, without wanting to sound too political. But my personal preference as an editor is I like to have, you know, if I can get a proposal and a sample chapter, I think that's quite handy. You know, in an isolated individual sort of submission process. You know, because you're at the stage where it's nice to have a sense of somebody's writing style and how they're going to go about the work itself of the book, and to be able to get some feedback on a sample of writing from a reviewer, as well as the kind of like the overarching ideas and thrust of a proposal that you get from a proposal document is helpful. And I think it's good to be able to do that at that stage, because you're still early enough on in the process that as an author, if you're kind of receptive to feedback and you're willing to kind of make adjustments and think about how you develop your style and that kind of thing, then it can be really beneficial to have that feedback. And, you know, for us as a publisher, it's helpful because it gives me a sense both of kind of style and substance and how that's being received from a reviewer, which, you know, only sort of strengthens, if a review is positive, only strengthens our sense that, you know, this could be a really good project for us and might make us more likely to kind of sort of make a contract offer for that project. If a manuscript is written, obviously, and it comes into us a kind of you know, uncontracted, and somebody's looking for that kind of that publisher partner, that's fine. Does happen, and you know, it's, you know, I certainly wouldn't turn away a good project for that reason. I mean, I think that things can be slightly more challenging then if you get feedback and there's quite a lot of, albeit constructive, criticism, you know, because you've got a full text. It can be a little bit harder to unpick, you know, a fully written manuscript, and to kind of, you know, sort of retrace steps and try and put into practice some of the what might be helpful and valid suggestions that have been put forward. So you know, I think it's good to get, my personal feeling is it's good to get publisher involvement and a peer review process going before you've got a fully written text. But as I say, I don't want to sort of set hairs running and alarm anyone that's thinking to themselves, oh, but I've written the whole thing now, what am I going to do, kind of thing. It's like, that's fine, you know, and different editors will probably have different preferences, but those are kind of the reasons for mine anyway.
Thank you, Audrey. I mean, on that, I wonder whether, and I think this might have wider applicability. I think we all, as part of our academic lives, deal with criticism of our work, whether we send things to journals, or, you know, whether we're giving papers, or in this case, whether we're submitting work to publishers. And I wonder whether you could give us all a little bit of just a guidance about how we should read critiques of our work, particularly say reviewers' comments on our proposals.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. I mean, you know, different reviewers will have different styles, shall we say, as I'm sure Claire knows what I'm kind of getting at. You know, some people are you know, very gentle with their criticism and very sympathetic and collegiate in the way they approach peer review, and I would say that probably is true of, you know, 85% of the reviews that I read and have read. You know, some people, there is a much smaller sort of percentage of people that do have valuable things to say, and we should try and extract those from the feedback that we get, and not allow what can be sort of quite a blunt or particularly sort of unhelpful, shall we say, style of delivering that feedback, which can sometimes come across in with some reviewers and the way they present their responses. And then there are some people that for you know, reasons unknown, offer feedback that isn't, both in terms of the way it's presented and the content, isn't particularly helpful. I mean, and it's frustrating when that happens. And as a publisher, you know, over a number of years, you start to learn to identify those reviews that maybe don't have the best interest for the project or the author at heart for whatever reason, and maybe somebody's written them when they've been in a particularly bad mood or whatever it may be. And you know, that's one of the reasons why we source multiple peer reviews for every project that we work on. You know, we get at least 2 proposal reviews, you know, at Bloomsbury certainly, for any project that we're considering initially. And if I had a particularly sort of combative or negative review, shall we say, I'd probably look to get a third opinion, you know, regardless. And I'd also have a good, you know, I'd be scrutinizing as the editor, I'd be scrutinizing the nature and content of that review before I pass it on. Because I think, you know, it's our responsibility as a publisher as well to help you as an author kind of with a kind of as much of a kind of an impartial standpoint on it as possible. You know, I want projects to be developed, and I want the peer review process to help develop you know, your work as an author. We're not, you know, we're keen to find ways of helping you to develop things. We're not in the business of wanting to kind of like, you know, sort of hammer you or find feedback that's going to kind of demoralize you. You know, if we get feedback in, it's kind of within reason, unless something is just wholly downright rude and you know, unconstructive to the point of, you know, just being kind of abusive, then I wouldn't send that on, because I don't think anyone deserves that. And there's a degree of sort of you know, sort of author care, the responsibility that we would take on that. At the same time, obviously, we need to be honest with you, and if we get feedback that's critical, you know, I'll always pass on a full peer review, but I will also give my take on it. So I would always say, well, actually, you know what, you know, reviewer X has said this, reviewer Y actually has a very different take on it, and I tend to see the logic a bit more behind what the positive reviewer has said versus what the negative reviewer has said. Sometimes if they've got a point, I might say, I think they've been a little heavy-handed here, but I still think this may be something that we want to consider. Might get a third opinion. It's difficult to talk about it in specifics when obviously every different situation, every situation is different. But that gives you a kind of a flavor, hopefully, of like some of the thought processes an editor's going through when they're getting feedback. We always like to kind of although peer review is anonymous, we always like to take suggestions from our authors about like the kinds of people they think could offer helpful commentary, have the kind of expertise that's gonna lend itself to developing the project further, because there's no harm in that. And I think that as long as the author knows that we're not necessarily going to go to those people, and when they get review feedback they won't know whether it was those people, whether it was somebody else, then I think that's completely fine, and it's useful to have those suggestions. I feel like I've wandered off topic for you a bit here, Claire, but into just generally musing about reviewing. But
I think that's really helpful, and I think it is something that can be sort of slightly mysterious and also sort of troubling. And I think it's good to have that sense of the kind of the ethical dimension in terms of your role as an editor, but also in terms of transparency as well. Yeah. I know lots of people. Obviously, whatever career stage you're at, somebody making even constructive suggestions about something that you may believe to be really good already can be tricky. I think that thing that some people suggest of reading it, putting it in a drawer, coming back to it a couple of days later when the kind of feeling has gone out a bit, and then you can really read the value, because there's always some value in the reports that we get, and that's the point of this process.
Absolutely.
And the point of this initiative, isn't it, to provide that kind of process for a number of people.
Yeah, no, completely. I think that's right. And I mean, I think the other thing I'd want to add, because, you just prompted me to think about it now, Claire, is that, I think that it's useful for, particularly junior scholars to know that, this, as I say, the process should be a kind of a collaborative, constructive, developmental one. It's not, gladiatorial. It's not meant to be there to kind of like create an atmosphere where you're doing battle with the reviewer, or we're trying to catch you out as a publisher. That's really not the purpose at all. We as a publisher, if we send something out for review, we see potential in it, and we want to kind of harness that potential and help work with you to develop the project and make it the best it can be. Now, that's not to say that that nothing that goes out for peer review ever ends up kind of like not making its way through to publication, because obviously some projects don't make it all the way through, and there are reasons why that happens at different points. But certainly the aim already at that early stage of getting something out for review is we want to work on this with you to try and see it through to becoming part of the list. We see it as something that we want to be a part of what we're doing. How can we make that happen? And peer review then is as Claire says, is kind of, there's no time pressure on our side of things. I think it's key to make clear is that we get peer review feedback and we share it with you. Don't feel like you need to kind of like take the legs out from underneath the reviewer and any critiques that they've come up with within 48 hours or anything. As I say, go away, have a think about it. It's all meant to benefit you and your project, your work. So there's no, as I say, there's no kind of time clock on our side that means that we need, sometimes people go away, they don't provide a kind of a response to reviews for me for a couple of months. That's fine. There's no rush. I'd rather you went away and took the time to kind of process it at your own pace. There's obviously other priorities, other things going on in life as well, which take up time. You want to free up the headspace to have a good think about the feedback that we've had in, and how you might want to make improvements, or actually, you disagree with the reviewer on certain points, and that's fine. And as long as I get a clear sense of your understanding, the reviewer is not God either. Ultimately, we don't necessarily expecting you to change everything that a reviewer has asked. If a reviewer thinks that you need to make changes X, Y, and Z in chapters 3, 4, and 5. If you've got a good reason why you don't think that's the case, and you can kind of explain your thinking to me, and I'm in agreement as the editor, then we just shelve that idea and we move forward, because we know we've taken into consideration the feedback, kind of weighed it up, and it's been a conscious thought process that's taken place, and the books, and the books the better for it, because we've weighed these different things up. So yeah, I think hopefully those are some further useful pointers when it comes to reviewing.
Thank you, Rodri. And Wendy has asked in the chat, can we tell them a little bit about last year's initiative winner? And I think I think I might start there by just sort of clarifying the stages, and then then I'll ask you, Rodri, to talk about our winner last year, or the recipient of the award. So the applications will come in, the proposals will come in, they'll be looked at and shortlisted by an IHR panel. The shortlisted proposals will then go to Bloomsbury, where they will be sent out for review. And then it's over to Bloomsbury at that stage to manage the process and to look at the reports and to decide which one is going to be awarded this £500 project completion grant. And that grant is designed really to help you with some of those incidental expenses around drawing a book project to a conclusion that sometimes it's really just hard to find the money for those. But Rodri, do you want to say a little bit about last year's process from your perspective?
Yeah, I think the process by and large went very smoothly. We had a number of really good applications that came in. I was really pleased with the variety and the strength of the shortlisted proposals that IHR sent on to us at Bloomsbury, which was great. And it was nice to see, having something that we talked about and obviously developed and worked on feels like slightly more in the abstract until you see that first set of shortlisted projects. It was really nice to see the response that it had received, and the quality of submissions was really impressive. The actual process itself was good. It was quite an interesting situation, having not having done an initiative like this before, when it came to the peer review process of getting anonymous peer reviews for those 5 shortlisted proposals. I think we learned a little, because you're only as fast as your slowest reviewer, and when you kind of extrapolate that process out across 5 projects, because you feel like you can't really give everyone a fair hearing until all the reviews are in for all of the projects. That process probably took us slightly longer than I think maybe any of us anticipated, but I think we can kind of that's given us a clearer sense, I think, of in this second year, having had that teething problem, we know a bit more now about what to expect timeline wise on that front. But yeah, that was all fine. And yeah, I mean, I think there were some really strong projects that didn't weren't selected for the initiative grant in the end. There could be only one that was selected. We went with a project called Development and Non-State Actors in Modern India, that was authored by Sandip Khanna, who's a seminar tutor at KCL. I mean, the peer reviews were very strong. Obviously, it's a great topic, both from a kind of as we said, touched upon right at the top of the workshop. It's a subject that helps us to bring a bit more diversity to the kind of the content that's out there, which is a nice opportunity. And it's also something, I think, in terms of market reach from a commercial point of view as a publisher, I think we looked at it and thought, well, for a global Anglophone audience, this is the kind of project that is going to find a bit more reach maybe than one or two of the other projects that were shortlisted as well. But even, as I say, even those shortlisted projects, I think the feedback that they received off the back of the whole process was really valuable. And as I said, to one or two of the projects that were maybe slightly more developed than one or two of the other shortlisted projects that we looked at, it's not, even from Bloomsbury's perspective, while you've not sort of received the initiative grant on this occasion, if you go away and develop the project, as a publisher, our door is always open to good scholarly publishing. So as a text develops or as a project develops, just because something maybe isn't ripe or isn't ready for publication at one point, doesn't mean that it won't be after a bit more work in 6 months, 12 months time, 18 months time. So, you know, there's always that opportunity. You know, it's not a kind of a sort of a do or die scenario for anyone, you know, either, you know, certainly obviously for the wider academic publishing community, but even for Bloomsbury, you know, if you submit something, it doesn't work out, you go away, you develop it further. You know, we're always interested in hearing how a project's kind of being developed. And Sandeep, going back to Sandeep, you know, I think that manuscript is due for us in 2026, so we'll be looking to publish in 2027. And I think there's also been some recent marketing information that's gone out both with the IHR and Bloomsbury that you could probably Google and have a little look at online for a bit more information about Sandeep's project as well, if that's of interest to anyone.
Thank you. Isha, is that a historic hand or a new hand?
It's a new hand.
Then ask your question.
Hi. I had a thought while you were talking about the reviewers, Rodri, there. Is there limitations to it? So, for example, obviously we all have supervisors when we have thesis. Could we recommend one of them if they would fit as a person in their expertise? And the second question, or someone else like that, or the second question, being an UK-based publisher, but a lot of obviously international themes in our thesis and in our proposals, can we recommend also international people that we know that would, like an author in the field that would have had similar books out there, might even be on that list of potential titles similar to mine, as discussed earlier, and whether that person can or cannot be someone who knows you and knows your project, because obviously we've reached out to a lot of scholars during our initial research for the thesis, and possibly had conversations with them, possibly met them. So are there any restrictions or limitations in towards those kind of areas?
Yeah, good questions. I should probably have given a bit more detail on this earlier, so I'm glad you've asked them. Yeah, I mean, I'd say straight away, one limitation is that we wouldn't be looking to go to a PhD supervisor or PhD examiners, so they'd be kind of ruled out. So in terms of recommendations, yeah, you want to kind of scratch those from your list. And yeah, it's interesting you say, because yeah, as you say, although I'm currently beaming in from Cardiff, but we've obviously got the London office as our base in the UK, but we've also got the office in New York in the US. We've got an office in Sydney, an office in New Delhi. And like every book that Bloomsbury publishes, I mean, different publishers will obviously have different market reach, and so this will be kind of publisher specific. But I mean, we're very much a global publisher. I mean, the biggest market for us is actually the US rather than the UK. You know, sort of about 55% of our kind of typical print runs we'd expect to get sold in the US. So yeah, we're very much looking to try and have as global an Anglophone audience for any of the books that we publish. So yeah, the more international it can be, the better, really. And our peer review kind of ideal peer review situation kind of mirrors that, in that, you know, we look to get a minimum of 2 peer reviews of any project. Ideally, we want one of those peer reviewers to be based in North America and one to be based outside of North America. Now, typically, you know, we often end up with kind of one based in the US, one based in the UK. And when I say where they're from, what I mean is where the institution they're attached to is based. You know, we're not talking about where somebody was born or what their passport is or anything. It's just, you know, because what we're trying to get a flavor of is, you know, and it's obviously, you can only get like a small taste of this from one person's opinion based in an institution, wherever that may be, but it's to try and get a bit of a feel for kind of like what the potential reach is, you know, in that particular regional market. So as I say, with North America being a big market for us, we're keen to get that, but obviously, you know, we're keen to get reviewers from wherever then, you know, whether it's, you know, a reviewer based in Japan or the UK or mainland Europe, wherever it may be, as long as it's somebody with the right expertise, you know, that's got the right sort of, you know, the relevant knowledge that to give a kind of a constructive and valuable opinion on something, then that's kind of the other obviously key requisite really for any reviewer.
Thank you. I had another question talking generally about the feedback and all of those things you mentioned. So beyond this initiative, someone decides to do a proper proposal as well, do you actually provide feedback on all proposals you've received beyond this as well? Or if the project is not going forward for whatever reason, you don't advise, you don't, 'cause there are, unfortunately, it happens more with journals, I think, than publishers, that you don't get any contact after your proposal. You just kind of, and the process, as you said, is months at a time, getting your reviewers and so on. So people expect months as well, but when that extends and extends, you don't know, has anyone actually read your proposal? Is anyone interested? Or have they read it and not interested? Or has it been sent out? And it happens a lot with journals. So I'm obviously not very familiar how much this happens with actual book publishing. So I would be interested to know what the kind of process is in that feedbacking or communicating what the next steps are or aren't.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I mean, I think I personally don't mind answering this, because I like to take a sort of a slightly moral high ground approach to this relative to some of my publishing colleagues, which is, you know, it gives me chills, the idea of people waiting around, not having had a response to something, not knowing what's going on, like feeling like they've kind of just like, they may as well have just like blasted their proposal out into space or something. You know, you know, being responsive and keeping communication lines open and leaving people feeling like they know what's going on is kind of, you know, that's essential to me. And I think that's, you know, it's the least that we owe anyone that's taken the time to kind of put something together and get in touch with us. I mean, you know, as I say, I can't speak to every publishing house. I can't even speak to every editor, but I certainly, that's my attitude. And, you know, I like to be as upfront and honest and as kind of quick to reply and giving people a sense of where we stand on something as I can, you know, without being gung-ho. If something comes in unsolicited, you know, if somebody's taking the time to write to fill out the proposal, or even if they're just dropping me an email with a paragraph or two, giving me a brief outline, you know, I will say, you know, I either think this is something that's going to work for us or not, you know, for whatever reason. You know, if, you know, whether that's, you know, if somebody presents me with a project and it's 400,000 words long or something, which I had just coming out recently, I was like, you know, where I actually had to say, well, the topic sounds interesting, but we literally don't have like a publishing model to support a project of that sort of size. And, you know, I'm not sure if you can reformulate it, you know, so there's a whole, all sorts of different reasons why something might not work for us, but I'll tell you straight away if that's the case. Otherwise, it would be a case of saying, well, if I do think something's worth, you know, us getting peer review feedback on, look to get peer reviews in place. Usually I like to say, you know, all being well, I'd like to try and get peer review feedback back to people within sort of 8 weeks. And whether or not we, you know, whether it's a kind of yes, this looks great, we're going to be taking it forward scenario, or whether it's kind of like, this is a bit uncertain, there's some takeaways here that suggest that there's more development that needs to be done, but obviously we'll keep the door open. Or whether it's a case of saying, look, I'm sorry, but given the feedback we've had, I really don't see how this is going to work. I'd always pass that information on and share the feedback and give you my take on what the next steps are going to be based on the feedback and where we think things have reached. So yeah, so from our point of view, you wouldn't be left not knowing. You know, I think, and as I say, I think that really is the way it should be. And I think that's, hopefully, as you say, maybe that's something that happens maybe more with journals. I don't know. I mean, I couldn't say categorically it doesn't happen with academic publishing, but it won't happen on my list. So
thank you. That, just because you mentioned it, one final question, and then I'll stop, I promise. Initial email, because there's, again, 2 different feedbacks or advice I've been getting from different publishers previously when I've attended these kind of talks. Some publishers, you have an idea, you don't have a full proposal, or you do have a full proposal in mind, but you want to run it by the publishers first, getting in touch and saying, hey, this is what I have. A small pitch, like you said, 25, 30 word pitch, elevator pitch, but in an email form. Is that something that is advisable or not? Or is that really, again, as you said, it depends on a publisher?
Yeah, I mean, I think unfortunately some of this does come down to kind of just you know, the luck of the draw with the personality, how people just handle their inboxes, to be quite honest. I mean, and how people kind of deal with emails and submissions and that kind of thing. you know, as I say, I think it's always better, more advisable to maybe drop somebody a quick email with just like a paragraph, you know, saying, "Oh, I'm interested in submitting a proposal. It's on this subject." You know, because the other thing I would sort of take the opportunity to do then, as somebody that's maybe looking to submit something, is say, "Oh, you know, do you have a particular form you want me to use for a submission? If this is something that you want me to put a proposal together for, just so you're working with the right documentation as well." You know, it's but yeah, I would always drop a line, because you know, if somebody sends me a proposal, I will have a look at it. But obviously, I always feel bad if somebody's gone off and independently put a full proposal together, submitted it, and then I look at it and go, this doesn't really work, like to the point where I'm not even going to send it out for peer review, because I know somebody's taken the time to do all that work on the proposal. Whereas if you drop me a quick line to say, "Oh, you know, I've got this," I can immediately sort of say, "Oh yeah, this topic fits with us and what we're thinking about doing," or, you know, that kind of thing. So yeah, that would be my advice. Now, as you say, some editors maybe don't pick up or respond to emails in the way that you'd hope, you know, you might hope with something like that. But I mean, you know, I can only speak to my own kind of practice, though. Like, certainly if somebody got in touch and said, you know, I'm an early research scholar at, you know, at this institution, I'm thinking about working on a project, you know, I'm doing a book on this, would you be interested in seeing a proposal? I'd probably get back to you straight away, because, you know, we're in the business of wanting good projects in that we can publish, and that's, you know, so, and there are other publishers out there, so, you know, it's the early bird catches the worm, as far as, you know, I'm concerned. So, you know, you'd probably get a response encouraging you to do a proposal. But yeah, that'll be my way of doing it anyway.
Thank you.
That's great, Rodri. Thank you. That sense of it being a dialogue and kind of expertise on both sides is really coming out strongly, and it's very lovely to hear that, because it, you know, it really sort of suggests that sense that we are all part of this sort of community of people who are interested in the past and in publishing about the past and in researching the past. Mina, I'm going to take your next question.
Thank you. I was just wondering if obviously everyone can't be successful in this competition, but supposing we're not successful, can we then approach Bloomsbury again with our proposal? Would you vet it? Or is it a no-no once you're through and, you know, through this? That's one question. And the second thing is, obviously, as we do in journal articles, we don't send the same proposal everywhere, right? So I have to wait till supposing I send it to you, then you get back and say, okay, we're not publishing, and then we approach the next publisher, right? We don't send out proposals to everyone at the same time.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I would say ideally not. You know, I've had different situations over a number of years now that, you know, sort of have created sort of confusion and complications, and you know, it's sort of varying degrees of acrimony between publishers and between authors and publishers. So yeah, I would advise, particularly, you know, I mean, I would say this, but, you know, I think the way we work and the way we operate with both the initiative and in general, you know, we are quite transparent and we're pretty communicative. You know, I can understand in some instances with certain presses, should we say, that will remain nameless, that kind of leave you in the lurch for months on end, that as an academic, I could quite well see that you'd be within your rights to feel like, well, I'm just kind of floating in space here, and I need some go forward in terms of what my plans are and what I want to do, and I'm not getting any response. Then I think that you'd be well within your rights to kind of speak to other publishers, even if, you know, that publisher X, that first publisher, has, you know, I wouldn't feel that they'd have the kind of the moral hold on my work and on my project in the way that you might fear that they think they do, because I think there's a degree of all bets are off then if people aren't going to kind of communicate and aren't going to kind of and, you know, be sympathetic and understanding to individuals that need to kind of their lives to be moving forward, need their work to be moving forward. So, I mean, it's difficult to give, I couldn't give you an exact date on that. Like, like, if, you haven't heard from them after 4 months, then, move on to the next publisher. You kind of got to make a kind of a personal decision on that, I think, as to what you feel is reasonable and what's unreasonable in terms of people sort of getting back to you and letting you know what's going on. But I would say in general with us, I would say, I would strongly prefer if you're putting yourself forward for the initiative, that someone is going to be shortlisted, projects are going to be shortlisted, somebody's going to be chosen. If you're shortlisted and actually you're having a conversation with 2 other publishers, and then somebody else missed out on the opportunity to be shortlisted, I think there are other considerations that should come into play there in terms of what you think is ethically the right thing to do, not just by us as a publisher, but by sort of other people that are considering going for the project. In terms of what you were saying, I mean, the way the situation worked this year, we had one. By the time we shortlisted the projects and we had the review feedback, all the review feedback was positive in general, I would say. Sandeep's project stood out, I would say, in terms of the feedback that we got, and that made things a little bit easier in some ways for us to kind of make a choice. So that was fine. There weren't really any other projects that I felt at that particular moment were in a position where they were necessarily ready for a contract offer from us for publication outside of the initiative. I've had 1 or 2 discussions with a couple of the shortlisted projects whereby those authors are actually going away and are continuing to have a dialogue with me offline about how we can maybe, look to sort of bring their projects onto the list if further development work takes place. There have been a couple of the other shortlisted projects where I certainly didn't say that the answer's no and will always be no to them, but they were maybe at an even earlier stage developmentally with where they needed the project to get to. If they come around in 18 months time to whatever it may take for them to have got things sort of further down the line, then we'd be open to considering it, and we would start a new peer review process with the material as they have it at that point, so and I think the same would be the case with this year's initiative, and if it turns out that actually there's another project that as you say, we can only really offer the initiative grant to one person, to one author, one project. If there's another project that looks like it's ready to be published and that person's interested in entertaining a contract offer from us outside of the initiative, on the understanding that they've not been successful in getting that initiative grant, then I'd be open to doing that, because as long as it's good quality scholarship that's being peer reviewed, which is essentially what this initiative is providing, projects, providing opportunities. Hopefully Claire would agree with me, is that if it means that we get to offer another opportunity in another guise to another up-and-coming academic, then all the better. So
just to add to that, I think that, I mean, the whole purpose of this is to provide a space for focused attention on particular projects, isn't it? And even those projects that don't finally get awarded the initiative grant, hopefully each of those has benefited from the kind of focused peer review that this initiative will have allowed them to have. So even if they end up being published somewhere else, so there's a kind of there's generosity to, I think, Bloomsbury's involvement here, but also, of course, reviewing on the whole is an act of generosity, because it's not paid. And what you're doing when you review a project or an article or a book proposal is to think of ways in which you can support that project to get better. So I think that underpins the whole of this initiative, really, is just that sense of mobilizing the community to kind of support people at this early stage in their careers. We've worked, Rodri, really hard, I think, this afternoon. Do we have any other questions? There's 2 messages down in the bottom. Let me see. Well, there's a thank you there from Norma. Thank you, Norma. Incredibly helpful seminar. Thanks to the IHR, to Rodri, for sharing your expertise and advice in such an approachable manner. Are there any more questions? Aisha?
Hi. I'm full of questions today. If there's a proposal in this initiative that is good and you're interested, but doesn't quite meet that initiative point, could we expect to be communicated that in another way, say like, oh, this is interesting, we could develop that. However, this is better for this initiative and this is getting the award. So is that making sense?
I could take that, because the process is split into two. So we have the IHR panel that looks at and does the shortlisting. So it's a panel of historians here at the IHR first of all. Then only those proposals that are shortlisted through that process will then go on to Bloomsbury. So then there will be direct contact between Bloomsbury and those particular people.
Great. Thank you.
I should probably add there as well, Claire, that, I mean, I think, obviously, if you find that you submit and you get shortlisted, then as a shortlisted author, then every shortlisted author will get direct communication with me once we've got, peer reviews, and there'll be that kind of conversation would happen regardless of what the kind of the outcome is. Anything that doesn't get shortlisted, I mean, you'll know that you haven't been shortlisted. If you submit and you don't get shortlisted, that doesn't mean that you're blackballed from submitting to Bloomsbury directly or anything like that. It's if you still felt, oh, hang on, you know what, I haven't been shortlisted. I mean, because we have no idea of the volume and strength of the projects that are going to be submitted, across the window. And I mean, as a publisher, we're not kind of, we've got a big list. We're looking to publish a good number of books every year. If something doesn't get shortlisted, it doesn't mean that it's not good enough to be published on our list necessarily. And if you wanted to send that to us for consideration, it may be that there just happen to be 5 stronger projects, all shortlisted, all of which are worthy of publication as well. So if you want to submit something to us directly after that, that's totally fine. If you wanted to get in touch with a proposal, because we'd still then consider it on its merits independently in the way we would if, any other unsolicited proposal that might come in.
Thank you. I think people are even inspired people are beginning to flag now. I think we're drawing to the end of this session. I'm glad you've got a cup of tea there, Rodri, or whatever it is you're drinking to keep you going this afternoon.
It's tea, I promise.
If there aren't any final questions, I can't see any, then I think I'll just take the opportunity of thanking Rodri for just, you're always so generous in your advice on the thesis to book kind of journey, but also it's just incredibly heartening to because of that kind of ethical kind of dimension to it. So really thank you for it. I've certainly found it inspiring. If only I had the time to write a book, I would be sending it to you, Rodri, as a proposal. But I really look forward to seeing proposals, I hope, from those of you who've been with us this afternoon. Yes, good luck with them.